Maya Chen looked at herself in the small mirror of the restaurant bathroom. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her white shirt was clean and pressed. She took a deep breath and walked back into the dining room of Le Grand, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. The restaurant was busy that Friday night. Rich people sat at tables covered with white cloth and shiny silverware. Maya had been working here for 6 months now. She needed this job badly. Her family needed the money she made from tips and her small salary. Maya was 22 years old, but she felt much older. 3 years ago, her life had been very different. She had been a music student at the state college with a full scholarship. She loved playing piano more than anything else in the world. Music was her dream, her passion, her future, but dreams don't pay for hospital bills. Her father had gotten very sick. The doctors said he needed expensive treatment. Her mother worked at a grocery store, but that money was not enough. The medical bills kept coming. Maya had to make a choice. She could keep studying music while her family lost everything, or she could drop out of college and work to help them. The choice was easy, even though it broke her heart. Maya picked up the water pitcher and walked to table 12. A middle-aged woman in a fur coat was complaining about the temperature of her soup. Maya listened politely and offered to bring her a new bowl. The woman rolled her eyes but agreed. As Maya walked toward the kitchen, she noticed a new customer at table 7. He was a tall man in an expensive dark suit. His hair was perfectly styled, and his watch probably cost more than Maya made in a year. He was looking at his phone and seemed annoyed about something. Maya recognized him from pictures in business magazines that were sometimes left at the restaurant. His name was Alexander Blackwood. He was 35 years old and owned a big technology company. People said he was worth billions of dollars. They also said he was not a very nice person. Maya tried to avoid serving his table, but her manager, Mr. Rodriguez, pointed at her, and then at table 7. She had no choice. She walked over with a smile on her face, even though she felt nervous. Rich customers could be difficult, especially the very rich ones. "Good evening, sir," Maya said politely. "Welcome to Le Grand. Can I start you with something to drink?" Alexander looked up from his phone. His eyes were cold and gray. He looked at Maya like she was not important at all. "I want the most expensive wine you have," he said without saying hello back. "And I want it now. I don't have time to wait." "Of course, sir. I'll bring that right away." Maya walked quickly to the wine storage room. The most expensive wine cost $800 a bottle. She had never handled anything so costly before. Her hands shook a little as she picked up the bottle and placed it carefully in an ice bucket. She carried the wine back to Alexander's table. He was still looking at his phone and talking loudly to someone on a business call. Maya stood there waiting for him to finish, but he ignored her completely. Finally, she cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, sir. Your wine is here." Alexander ended his call and looked annoyed that she had interrupted him. Maya began to open the wine bottle carefully. She had done this hundreds of times before, but tonight felt different. The man made her nervous with his cold stare. As she pulled the cork from the bottle, Alexander suddenly moved his chair back without warning. Maya stepped backward quickly to avoid bumping into him, but as she did, her foot caught the leg of another chair. Everything happened in slow motion. Maya felt herself falling backward. The expensive wine bottle flew from her hands. The dark red wine splashed everywhere. She watched in horror as the wine covered Alexander's perfect white shirt and expensive suit jacket. The restaurant became completely quiet. Every person stopped talking and turned to look at their table. Maya felt her face turn red with shame and fear. Alexander stood up slowly. Wine was dripping from his jacket onto the floor. His face was twisted with anger. "You stupid girl," he shouted so loudly that everyone in the restaurant could hear. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" "It costs more money than you make in 5 years. Maya's heart was beating fast. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. Please let me help you clean it. Don't touch me." Alexander stepped away from her like she had a disease. "You people never think before you act. You just destroy things that belong to your betters." Maya felt tears starting in her eyes, but she tried not to cry. "Please, sir. I can pay for the cleaning. I'll work extra shifts to pay you back." Alexander laughed, but it was not a nice laugh. "You think this can be cleaned? This suit is ruined. And you think your little waitress salary can pay me back?" Mr. Rodriguez came running over. He looked very worried. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry. This has never happened before. Please let me— I want her fired, Alexander said, pointing at Maya. Right now. And I want her banned from every decent restaurant in this city. I have connections everywhere. Maya felt like she couldn't breathe. She needed this job. Her family needed this job. Her father was still getting treatment and they had bills to pay every month. Please, Maya whispered. I need this job. My family needs this job. I'll do anything to make this right. Alexander smiled, but it was a cruel smile. He looked around the restaurant and saw that everyone was watching. He seemed to enjoy having an audience for Maya's shame. Anything? He asked loudly. Well, let me think about that. Alexander walked around Maya like she was an object in a store that he was thinking about buying. His eyes were cold and mean. I have an idea, he said. I see there's an old piano in the corner of this restaurant. If you can play something beautiful for me, something that shows you have some value as a human being, then maybe I'll forget about this accident. Maya looked at the piano. It was old and probably out of tune, sitting in the corner where people hardly noticed it. But, Alexander continued, his voice getting louder, if you can't play anything good, then you're fired. And I'll make sure you never work anywhere decent again. What do you say? Are you willing to take that chance? Maya looked around the restaurant. Every face was turned toward her. Some people looked sorry for her. Others looked excited to see what would happen. A few looked disgusted with Alexander's behavior, but no one said anything to help her. She looked at Mr. Rodriguez, hoping he would stop this cruel game. But he just looked scared and helpless. Alexander Blackwood was too powerful to fight. Maya looked back at the piano. She hadn't played in 3 years. Her fingers probably wouldn't remember the songs. But she had no choice. If she said no, she would definitely lose her job. If she tried to play and failed, she would also lose her job. But at least this way she had a small chance. All right, Maya said quietly. I'll try. Alexander's cruel smile got bigger. Excellent. This should be entertaining. Everyone watch carefully. Let's see if this waitress can do anything besides spill wine on her betters. Maya walked slowly toward the piano. Each step felt like it took forever. Her legs felt weak and her hands were shaking. She could feel every person in the restaurant watching her. When she reached the piano, she sat down on the small bench. The keys were dusty and yellow with age. Maya placed her fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. She had no idea that this moment would change both her life and Alexander's life forever. Maya sat at the old piano bench and stared at the dusty keys. Her heart was beating so fast she thought everyone in the restaurant could hear it. The wine stain on Alexander's shirt had already started to dry, making the white fabric look like it had been splashed with blood. Alexander walked closer to the piano. He was enjoying this moment. Maya could see it in his eyes. He thought he had won already. He thought she would embarrass herself and prove that she was just a stupid waitress who didn't belong around important people like him. Well, Alexander said loudly, we don't have all night. Some of us have important things to do. Maya looked around the restaurant one more time. About 50 people were watching her. Some were holding their phones, probably ready to record her failure. A few women looked sorry for her, but they didn't say anything to help. The men mostly looked curious about what would happen next. Mr. Rodriguez stood near the kitchen door, wringing his hands. Maya knew he was thinking about his business. If Alexander Blackwood was angry, he could write bad reviews online. He could tell his rich friends not to come here. He could destroy the restaurant just like he was about to destroy Maya's life. I'm waiting, Alexander said. His voice was cold and impatient. Play something worthy of my time or admit that you're just another worthless— Give her a minute, said a quiet voice from across the room. Everyone turned to look. An elderly man with white hair and kind eyes was sitting at a corner table. He was wearing a simple gray suit, nothing fancy like the other customers. Alexander looked annoyed. Excuse me? I said give her a minute, the old man repeated. The young lady has been through enough embarrassment for one evening. At least let her gather herself before you continue your little show. Alexander's face turned red with anger. No one had challenged him in years. People always did what he wanted because he had money and power. This is none of your business, old man. Stay out of it. The elderly man just smiled and went back to drinking his coffee. But his words had given Maya a moment to think. Maya closed her eyes and tried to remember. 3 years ago, she had been one of the best piano students at the college. Her teacher, Professor Martinez, had always said she had a gift. She had played in concerts and competitions. She had won awards. But 3 years was a long time. She hadn't touched a piano since she left college. Her fingers probably wouldn't remember how to move. The songs she used to know might be forgotten. Alexander was getting more impatient. "I'm giving you 30 more seconds, then this game is over." Maya opened her eyes and looked at the keys. Suddenly, she remembered something Professor Martinez had told her once. "Music isn't about perfect technique," he had said. "Music is about telling a story with your heart. If you play with your heart, your fingers will remember what to do." Maya thought about her father lying in the hospital bed 3 years ago. She thought about her mother crying over the medical bills. She thought about the day she had to tell Professor Martinez she was leaving college. She thought about all the dreams she had given up. Then she thought about tonight. About Alexander's cruel words. About the way he had looked at her like she was nothing. About how he was using his power to hurt someone who couldn't fight back. Maya placed her fingers on the keys. "Time's up," Alexander announced. "Since you can't think of anything to play, I think we can all agree that—" The first note cut through his words like a knife. Maya had chosen to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in classical piano music. It was also one of the most beautiful. The first notes were soft and sad, like someone telling a story about loss and pain. Maya's fingers moved slowly across the keys, finding their way back to the music they had loved so much. The restaurant became completely silent. Even Alexander stopped talking. As Maya played, something magical began to happen. Her fingers remembered everything. They remembered the way the keys felt under her touch. They remembered the rhythm and the melody. They remembered the emotion that made the music come alive. The sad beginning of the piece grew into something more powerful. Maya's hands moved faster now, playing complex runs and difficult chords. The old piano might have been dusty, but it had been a good instrument once. Under Maya's skilled touch, it began to sing again. People in the restaurant started to lean forward in their chairs. Some of them had never heard classical music played live before. They didn't know what the piece was called, but they could feel the story Maya was telling with her hands. Alexander's confident smile was gone now. He was staring at Maya with surprise and confusion. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to fail. She was supposed to prove that she was just an ordinary waitress with no special talents. But the music coming from the piano was anything but ordinary. Maya played the middle section of the ballade, where the melody becomes wild and passionate. Her whole body moved with the music. She had forgotten about the restaurant, forgotten about Alexander, forgotten about everything except the song pouring out of her heart. Some people in the restaurant had tears in their eyes. The music was so beautiful and so sad that it made them think of their own lost dreams and broken hearts. An old woman at table 3 whispered to her husband, "I haven't heard playing like this since I was a girl in Vienna." A young man near the window put down his phone and just listened. He had been planning to record Maya's failure, but now he couldn't bear to disturb the magic that was happening. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working and come out to listen. The chef, who was from France and knew good music when he heard it, stood with his mouth open in amazement. Alexander felt something strange happening in his chest. For a moment, he almost forgot to be angry. The music was doing something to him that he didn't understand. It was making him feel things he hadn't felt in years. But then he remembered who he was. He was Alexander Blackwood. He was rich and powerful and important. He couldn't let a waitress make him feel weak or emotional. Maya reached the final section of the piece. This was the hardest part, where the pianist had to play incredibly fast runs with both hands while keeping the melody clear and strong. Many professional pianists struggled with this section. Maya played it perfectly. Her hands flew across the keys like birds dancing in the air. The music built to a powerful climax, then gradually became soft and sad again, ending with a few quiet notes that seemed to hang in the air long after she stopped playing. For several seconds, nobody moved or spoke. The silence was complete. Then, from the corner of the room, the elderly man who had spoken up earlier began to clap. Slowly, other people joined in. Within moments, the entire restaurant was applauding. Maya sat at the piano bench, breathing hard. She couldn't believe what had just happened. For 15 minutes, she had forgotten all her troubles and returned to the world of music that she loved so much. But then she remembered where she was and why she was playing. She turned to look at Alexander. His face was pale and he looked confused and angry. The cruel smile was completely gone now. For the first time in the evening, he didn't know what to say. The applause continued for a full minute. Some people were standing now, giving Maya a standing ovation. She had never received such recognition before, not even in college concerts. Finally, the elderly man who had started the applause walked over to Maya. Everyone watched as he approached the piano. "My dear," he said in a kind voice, "that was absolutely magnificent. It's been years since I've heard Chopin played with such feeling and skill." Maya looked at him more carefully now. There was something familiar about his face, but she couldn't remember where she might have seen him before. Alexander found his voice again. "Yes, well, it was adequate," he said. But his voice didn't sound as confident as before. "I suppose it was better than I expected from a waitress." The elderly man turned to look at Alexander with disapproval. "That young lady just gave us a performance that would be worthy of Carnegie Hall, and you call it adequate?" Alexander's face turned red again. "Look, old man, I don't know who you think you are, but my name is Professor William Hayes," the elderly man said calmly. "I teach at the Juilliard School in New York. I've been teaching piano for 40 years, and I know exceptional talent when I hear it." Maya's eyes widened with shock. The Juilliard School was the most famous music school in America. Only the most gifted musicians in the world studied there. Professor Hayes turned back to Maya. "My dear, where did you study music?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "State College. I had a scholarship, but I had to leave 3 years ago." "What was your name when you were a student?" "Maya Chen." Professor Hayes's face lit up with recognition. "Maya Chen, of course. You were the young woman who won the state piano competition 3 years ago. Professor Martinez from the State College called me about you. He said you were one of the most promising students he had ever taught." Maya felt tears starting in her eyes. "He wanted to recommend me for Juilliard, but I had to drop out before he could send the application." "We all wondered what happened to you," Professor Hayes said. "You just disappeared from the music world." Professor Martinez was heartbroken. Alexander stood there listening to this conversation with growing discomfort. He was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't just some random waitress. Maya walked away from the piano with her head held high. She could feel everyone watching her, but now it felt different than before. Before, people had been watching her shame and embarrassment. Now they were watching her with respect and admiration. Alexander stood frozen by the piano, still trying to understand what had just happened. His expensive suit was still stained with wine, but that seemed unimportant now. The cruel joke he had planned to play on Maya had turned into something completely different. Professor Hayes was still standing by the piano, looking at Alexander with obvious disapproval. The elderly man shook his head sadly. "In 40 years of teaching music," Professor Hayes said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "I have met many wealthy people who think money makes them better than everyone else. But tonight, I have seen something that proves them wrong." Alexander felt his face getting hot with embarrassment. He wasn't used to being criticized, especially not in public. Usually people were afraid to speak against him because of his money and power. "That young woman has more talent in her little finger than most people have in their entire body," Professor Hayes continued. "And she has more character than certain people who think they can buy respect with their money." Alexander wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the words. Everything Professor Hayes said was true. Maya had just shown incredible skill and grace under pressure. She had taken his cruel challenge and turned it into something beautiful. Maya had returned to work, but she was having trouble concentrating. Her hands were still shaking from the performance. She hadn't played piano for 3 years, and she had forgotten how much she loved it. For those 15 minutes, she had felt like her old self again. She tried to focus on serving her other customers, but people kept stopping her to say nice things about her playing. An older woman grabbed her hand and said, "My dear, that was the most beautiful music I've ever heard in a restaurant." A young couple at table 5 asked her where they could hear her play again. Maya had to explain that she wasn't a professional musician anymore, that she was just a waitress trying to make enough money to help her family. But the hardest part was seeing the disappointment in their faces when she told them she didn't perform anywhere else. Meanwhile, Alexander was trying to finish his dinner, but he couldn't taste the food. He kept thinking about Maya's performance and Professor Hayes' words. He also noticed that other customers in the restaurant were looking at him with disgust. A businessman at the next table was talking quietly to his wife, but Alexander could hear every word. "Did you see how that rich guy treated that poor girl?" the man whispered. "He was trying to humiliate her just for fun. That's the problem with these billionaire types. They think they can treat regular people like toys." His wife nodded. Thank goodness she turned out to be so talented. She showed him that money isn't everything. Alexander had never cared what ordinary people thought about him before, but tonight was different. For some reason, their opinions bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He tried to focus on his phone and answer business emails, but he kept looking up to watch Maya as she worked. She moved with grace and dignity, treating every customer with respect and kindness, even after what he had put her through. Professor Hayes finished his coffee and walked over to Maya as she was clearing a table. "My dear," he said softly, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what happened to your father? Is he better now?" Maya set down the plates she was carrying. "He's doing much better, thank you for asking. The treatment worked, but we're still paying off the medical bills. That's why I need to keep working." "I understand," Professor Hayes said, "but I want you to know that it's not too late to return to music. You have extraordinary talent. The world needs to hear you play." Maya smiled sadly. "That's very kind of you to say, but I can't afford to go back to school. And even if I could, I've been away from music for 3 years. I'm probably too far behind to catch up." Professor Hayes shook his head firmly. "Nonsense. Talent like yours doesn't disappear. It just waits patiently until it's ready to shine again. What you played tonight proves that your gift is still there, stronger than ever." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to Maya. "This has my phone number and email address. Please think about contacting me. There might be ways to help you return to music that you haven't considered." Maya looked at the card with surprise. "I don't understand. Why would you want to help me?" "Because I've spent my whole life looking for students with real musical gifts," Professor Hayes explained. "Most of my students at Juilliard are very good, but only a few have that special something that makes music come alive. You have it, Maya. You have that rare ability to touch people's hearts with your playing." Maya put the business card in her pocket, but she didn't look hopeful. "Professor Hayes, I appreciate your kindness, but I can't just abandon my family again. They need me to work and help pay the bills." "I'm not asking you to abandon anyone," he said gently. "I'm asking you to consider that there might be a way to help your family and follow your dreams at the same time." After Professor Hayes left the restaurant, Maya continued working, but his words stayed in her mind. She had given up hope of ever returning to music, but tonight had reminded her of how much she missed it. Alexander was also having trouble focusing on anything except Maya. He watched as she gracefully handled difficult customers, always staying polite and professional. He saw her help an elderly man read the menu when he forgot his glasses. He noticed how she remembered exactly how each customer liked their coffee. For the first time, Alexander began to see Maya as a real person instead of just a servant. He realized that she worked much harder than he did, for much less money, and she did it without complaining. As the evening went on, Alexander felt worse and worse about his behavior. He had tried to humiliate Maya just because she had accidentally spilled wine on him. He had used his power to put her in an impossible situation, expecting her to fail so he could feel superior. But Maya hadn't failed. She had succeeded in the most amazing way possible. She had shown everyone in the restaurant that she was special, that she had gifts that no amount of money could buy. When it was time for Alexander to pay his bill, Maya came to his table one more time. She moved carefully, making sure not to get too close to him. Her hands were steady now, but Alexander could see that she was still being extra cautious. "Here is your check, sir," Maya said politely, placing the leather folder on the table. Alexander looked up at her. Up close, he could see that she had intelligent, kind eyes. He had been so angry earlier that he hadn't really looked at her face. Now he realized she was quite pretty, but more than that, she had a quality of inner strength that he found impressive. "Maya," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Maya looked surprised. She hadn't expected him to apologize for anything. "What you did tonight was remarkable," Alexander continued. "I was wrong to put you in that situation. I was angry about the wine, and I took it out on you in a way that was cruel and unfair." Maya didn't say anything at first. She was trying to decide if his apology was real or if this was another game. I also want you to know that I won't cause any trouble for you or the restaurant, Alexander added. You don't have to worry about losing your job because of what happened. Maya nodded politely. Thank you, sir. Alexander opened the leather folder and looked at his bill. The total was $847, mostly because of the expensive wine that had been spilled. He pulled out his credit card, but then he had another idea. He reached into his wallet and pulled out several $100 bills. He counted out 15 of them and put them on the table next to the check. Maya's eyes widened with shock. A $1,500 tip was more money than she made in a month. Sir, this is too much, Maya said. I can't accept this. Alexander stood up from his chair. Yes, you can. You earned it tonight. That performance was worth much more than $1,500. Maya stared at the money. With that much extra cash, she could pay off one of her father's medical bills completely. Her family could have a little breathing room for the first time in years. But something inside her felt uncomfortable about taking money from Alexander. It felt too much like he was trying to buy forgiveness for his cruel behavior. I don't want your charity, Maya said firmly, pushing the money back toward him. Alexander was shocked. In his world, everyone wanted his money. People competed for his attention and approval because they hoped to benefit from his wealth. He had never met anyone who refused a gift like this. It's not charity, Alexander said. It's payment for an incredible performance. You gave everyone in this restaurant something beautiful tonight. Maya looked at the money again. She thought about her father's medical bills, about her mother working double shifts at the grocery store, about all the things her family needed. But she also thought about her pride and dignity. She had played tonight because Alexander had forced her to, not because she wanted his money. Keep your money, Mr. Blackwood, Maya said. I don't want to owe you anything. She turned and walked away, leaving Alexander standing alone at his table with the cash still in his hand. For the first time in many years, Alexander Blackwood felt truly impressed by another person. Maya had just refused more money than most people made in months. The next morning, Alexander woke up in his huge penthouse apartment, but he felt uncomfortable in his own bed. He had not slept well. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear Maya's music and see the disappointed faces of the people in the restaurant. Alexander got dressed in another expensive suit and tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept going back to the night before. He had built his whole life around the idea that money and power made him better than other people. Maya had proven that idea wrong in just 15 minutes. He sat in his office on the top floor of his company building, looking out at the city below. Usually the view made him feel powerful and important. Today it just made him feel alone. His assistant, Jennifer, came in with his morning coffee and schedule. She noticed that he seemed distracted. Is everything all right, Mr. Blackwood? Jennifer asked. You seem different today. Alexander almost told her about what happened at the restaurant, but then he changed his mind. He wasn't ready to talk about it yet. I'm fine, he said, just thinking about some business matters. But Alexander wasn't thinking about business at all. He was thinking about Professor Hayes and the way the elderly man had looked at him with such disappointment. He was thinking about Maya's refusal to take his money and the dignity in her voice when she walked away. Around noon, Alexander couldn't concentrate anymore. He told Jennifer to cancel his afternoon meetings and left the office early. He drove around the city for an hour, not really going anywhere, just thinking. Finally, he found himself parked outside the public library. Alexander hadn't been in a library since college, but something drew him inside. He went to the computer section and started searching for information about Maya Chen. He found several old newspaper articles about piano competitions from 3 years ago. There was Maya's picture, smiling as she held a first-place trophy. The headline read, "Local Student Wins State Piano Competition." Alexander read the article carefully. It said that Maya had beaten 60 other pianists from across the state. Her teacher, Professor Martinez, was quoted saying, "Maya has the potential to become a world-class pianist. She has both the technical skill and the emotional depth that great musicians need." Another article talked about Maya receiving a full scholarship to study music at the state college. There was a photo of her with her parents at the scholarship ceremony. Her father looked healthy and proud, and her mother was crying happy tears. Alexander kept searching and found more articles about Maya's success as a student. She had won several more competitions and had been chosen to perform with the city symphony orchestra. Everything pointed to a bright future in music. Then the articles stopped. 3 years ago, Maya Chen simply disappeared from the music world. Alexander felt a strange emotion that he couldn't identify at first. Then he realized it was guilt. He was seeing proof of what Maya had given up, and it made his behavior from the night before seem even worse. He left the library and drove to the hospital where Maya's father had been treated. Alexander had connections everywhere, and he used them to find out more about the Chen family's medical situation. What he learned made him feel sick to his stomach. Maya's father had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer that required expensive experimental treatment. The family's insurance had covered some of the costs, but not nearly enough. The bills had been enormous, over $200,000. Alexander read through the financial records that his connections had provided. He saw how the Chen family had borrowed money, sold their house, and used up all their savings. Maya's mother had taken a second job. Maya herself had withdrawn from college in the middle of her sophomore year to work and help pay the bills. The records showed that Maya's father was now healthy, but the family was still paying off debts from his treatment. Maya was making minimum wage plus tips at the restaurant, and most of that money went straight to medical bills and basic living expenses. Alexander sat in his car outside the hospital, staring at the papers in his hands. He thought about his own life and how easy everything had been for him. He had inherited millions of dollars from his grandfather. He had never had to choose between his dreams and his family's survival. For the first time, Alexander understood what real sacrifice looked like. Maya hadn't just given up her music career for a little while. She had given up everything she loved to save her father's life. That evening, Alexander found himself driving past Le Grand Restaurant. He told himself he was just curious, but deep down he knew he wanted to see Maya again. He parked across the street and watched through the restaurant windows. Maya was working hard as usual. Alexander could see her moving between tables with the same grace and kindness she had shown the night before. Even from a distance, he could see that she treated every customer with respect, whether they were rich or poor. Alexander sat in his car for an hour, watching Maya work and thinking about everything he had learned about her. She was not just a talented musician who had been forced to give up her dreams. She was also a loving daughter who had sacrificed everything for her family, and a hard-working young woman who faced each day with dignity and strength. As he watched, Alexander saw something that made his heart sink. Maya was serving a table of young people who looked like college students. They were probably around her age, maybe a few years younger. They were laughing and having fun, talking about their classes and their plans for the future. Alexander realized that these students had the life Maya should have had. They were getting an education, following their dreams, and planning for bright futures. Maya was serving them coffee and cleaning up after them, even though she was probably smarter and more talented than any of them. The unfairness of it hit Alexander like a physical blow. Maya should have been performing in concert halls, not carrying plates in restaurants. She should have been studying at Juilliard with Professor Hayes, not worrying about paying medical bills. Alexander started his car and drove home, but he couldn't get Maya out of his mind. That night, he did something he hadn't done in years. He looked up videos of classical piano music on the internet and listened for hours. He found a recording of the piece Maya had played the night before, Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The pianist was a famous musician who had won international competitions and played in the world's best concert halls, but even this professional recording didn't move Alexander the way Maya's performance had. There was something special about the way she played, something that came from her heart and her life experience. Alexander realized that Maya's music was so powerful because it came from real pain and real love. She hadn't just learned the notes and the technique. She had lived the emotions that made the music meaningful. Over the next few days, Alexander couldn't focus on his work. He kept thinking about Maya and her family. He researched Professor Hayes and the Juilliard School. He learned that getting into Juilliard was incredibly difficult and expensive, but that the school had scholarship programs for exceptional students. Alexander also learned more about Maya's former teacher, Professor Martinez. The man had tried to keep in touch with Maya after she left college, but she had been too embarrassed about her situation to maintain contact. Professor Martinez had told colleagues that losing Maya was one of the biggest regrets of his teaching career. 1 week after the incident at the restaurant, Alexander made a decision. He got dressed in a simple business suit and drove to the Chen family's apartment building. It was a small, old building in a neighborhood that Alexander had never visited before. The hallways were clean but worn, and he could hear children playing in some of the apartments. Alexander found the Chen family's apartment and knocked on the door. Maya's mother answered, still wearing her grocery store uniform from work. "Mrs. Chen?" Alexander asked politely. "My name is Alexander Blackwood. I met your daughter Maya at the restaurant where she works. I was wondering if I could speak with you and your husband for a few minutes." Mrs. Chen looked confused and worried. She recognized Alexander's name from the news and wondered why such a famous businessman would come to their humble apartment. "Maya is not here," Mrs. Chen said carefully. "She is at work." "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about Maya," Alexander explained. "About her music and her future?" Mrs. Chen hesitated, then invited Alexander inside. The apartment was small but very clean and comfortable. Family photos covered one wall, including several pictures of Maya at piano competitions and recitals. Mr. Chen was sitting in a chair by the window, reading a book. He looked much healthier than in the old newspaper photos, but Alexander could see that the illness had aged him. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen," Alexander began, "I want to talk to you about your daughter's incredible talent." Mrs. Chen and her husband exchanged worried looks. They didn't understand why this powerful man was interested in Maya. Alexander took a deep breath and told them the whole story of what had happened at the restaurant. He explained how he had tried to humiliate Maya, and how she had responded with grace and extraordinary musical skill. "Your daughter is one of the most talented musicians I have ever heard," Alexander said. "But more than that, she is one of the most decent human beings I have ever met. She showed me that there are things more important than money and power." 3 days after his visit to the Chen family apartment, Alexander was sitting in his office trying to work, but his mind kept wandering. He had started something with Maya's parents, but he knew that Maya herself would be much harder to convince. He had learned from Mrs. Chen that Maya worked double shifts on weekends and had Tuesday evenings off. Alexander decided that Tuesday would be the best time to approach her, when she wasn't exhausted from work. But first, he wanted to learn more about Maya's musical background. Alexander called his assistant Jennifer into his office. "I need you to find someone for me," he said. "A music professor named Martinez who teaches at the state college. I want to meet with him as soon as possible." Jennifer looked curious but didn't ask questions. She was used to Alexander making unusual requests. 2 hours later, Alexander was driving to the state college campus. It had been 15 years since he graduated from his expensive private university, and he had never visited a state school before. The campus was smaller and older than what Alexander was used to, but it looked friendly and welcoming. Students were sitting on the grass reading books and talking with friends. Alexander felt a strange sadness as he realized that Maya should have been here, finishing her degree and preparing for a music career. Professor Martinez was waiting in his office in the music building. He was a man in his 50s with kind eyes and calloused fingers from years of piano playing. His office was small and cluttered with sheet music and books about famous composers. "Mr. Blackwood," Professor Martinez said as they shook hands, "I have to admit I'm very curious about why you want to discuss Maya Chen with me." Alexander had decided to be completely honest. He told Professor Martinez the whole story of what had happened at the restaurant, including his own shameful behavior. Professor Martinez listened without interrupting. When Alexander finished, the professor sat quietly for a moment thinking. "Maya was the most gifted student I have ever taught," Professor Martinez finally said. "In 30 years of teaching, I have never had another student with her combination of technical skill and emotional depth." He walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder thick with papers and photographs. "These are all Maya's competition recordings and performance reviews," Professor Martinez explained, opening the folder on his desk. "She won every competition she entered. Other schools were trying to recruit her. I was planning to recommend her for Juilliard." Alexander looked through the papers. There were glowing reviews from judges, newspaper articles, and photos of Maya receiving awards and scholarships. "What happened when she left school?" Alexander asked. Professor Martinez's face became sad. "Her father got sick and the family needed money immediately. Maya came to my office one day and told me she was withdrawing from school to get a job. I tried to talk her out of it. I offered to lend her money, to help her find other scholarships, to work with her on a payment plan. The professor walked to the window and looked out at the campus. But Maya was determined. She said her family needed her and her music would have to wait. I haven't seen her since that day, but I think about her often. I always hoped she would come back. Do you think she could still have a professional music career? Alexander asked. Professor Martinez turned around quickly. Absolutely. Talent like Maya's doesn't disappear. She might need some time to get back into shape, but with proper training she could perform anywhere in the world. Alexander felt excited and hopeful. What would she need to get back to that level? Intensive training with a master teacher, Professor Martinez said. Someone like Professor Hayes at Juilliard. Regular practice time with a good piano. Performance opportunities to build her confidence again. And time. She would need time to focus on music instead of working to survive. That afternoon, Alexander made several phone calls. He called Professor Hayes at Juilliard and explained Maya's situation. Professor Hayes was very interested in working with Maya and said he could arrange for her to audit his classes while preparing for the official admission process. Alexander also called a real estate agent and asked about renting a small apartment near Juilliard that would have a piano. The agent found several options within Alexander's budget, which was essentially unlimited. But Alexander knew that all of these plans were useless if Maya refused to accept his help. That Tuesday evening, Alexander waited outside Le Grand Restaurant until Maya finished her shift. He watched through the window as she cleaned tables and said goodbye to the other staff members. When Maya came outside, she was surprised to see Alexander waiting by his expensive car. "Mr. Blackwood," she said carefully, "what are you doing here?" "I was hoping we could talk," Alexander said. "Could I buy you a cup of coffee?" Maya looked tired and suspicious. "I don't think that's a good idea. I just want to go home and rest." "Please," Alexander said. "I have something important to discuss with you." "It's about your music." Maya hesitated. She was curious, but she also didn't trust Alexander. Their first meeting had been too unpleasant. 5 minutes, she said finally. "There's a diner down the street." They walked to the diner in silence. It was a simple place with plastic chairs and fluorescent lights, very different from the fancy restaurant where they had first met. Maya ordered coffee, and Alexander did the same, even though he usually only drank expensive coffee from specialty shops. "What do you want to talk about?" Maya asked directly. Alexander took a deep breath. "I want to apologize again for how I treated you at the restaurant. My behavior was inexcusable." Maya nodded but didn't say anything. "I've spent the past week learning about your musical background," Alexander continued. "I talked to Professor Martinez at your old school. I met with Professor Hayes from Juilliard. I learned about your father's illness and your family's financial situation." Maya's face turned red with anger. "You had no right to investigate my personal life. Who I am and what my family goes through is none of your business." Alexander had expected this reaction. "You're right. I overstepped boundaries. But Maya, what I learned convinced me that the world is being cheated out of something beautiful." "What do you mean?" "You should be performing in concert halls, not serving coffee. You should be studying with the best teachers in the world, not worrying about medical bills. You have a gift that very few people possess." Maya's anger grew stronger. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I chose to give up music because I didn't care about it? Of course not. I know you gave up everything to help your family. That shows incredible love and character. But Maya, what if there was a way for you to help your family and follow your musical dreams at the same time?" Maya stared at him suspiciously. "What are you talking about?" Alexander pulled out the folder of information he had gathered. "Professor Hayes wants to work with you at Juilliard. Professor Martinez believes you could still have a world-class career. There are scholarship opportunities available." "Scholarships don't pay for everything," Maya said. "Even if I could get into Juilliard, I would still need money for living expenses. And my family would lose the income from my job. We can't afford that." "What if your family's medical debts were paid off completely?" Alexander asked quietly. Maya went very still. "What?" "What if someone paid off all your father's medical bills, so your family wouldn't need your income from the restaurant job?" Maya stood up so quickly that she knocked over her coffee cup. The hot liquid spilled across the table, but neither of them moved to clean it up. "Absolutely not," Maya said loudly. I will not take charity from you or anyone else. It's not charity, Alexander said quickly. It would be an investment. With proper training, you could earn enough from your music career to pay back every penny. And what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if 3 years away from music has ruined my chances? Alexander looked directly into Maya's eyes. Then you would still be better off than you are now. At least you would know you tried. Maya was shaking with emotion. You don't understand. My family has pride. We don't take handouts from rich people who feel guilty about their behavior. This isn't about my guilt, Alexander said, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. This is about giving you the chance you deserve. Maya picked up her purse and started to leave. Find someone else to make yourself feel better about being cruel to poor people. Alexander stood up too. Maya, wait. At least think about it. Talk to your parents. Talk to Professor Martinez. Don't let pride keep you from the life you were meant to have. Maya turned back to face him. The life I was meant to have? You think my life serving coffee is somehow wrong or shameful? Alexander realized he had said the wrong thing. No, that's not what I meant. There's nothing shameful about any honest work, but you have a rare gift and the world deserves to hear your music. The world will survive without hearing me play piano, Maya said. My family survived because I gave up music to help them. That was the right choice, and I don't regret it. She started to walk away again, but Alexander called after her. What about Professor Hayes? He's expecting to hear from you. Maya stopped but didn't turn around. Then you can tell him he'll be disappointed. After Maya left, Alexander sat alone in the diner for a long time. The waitress came to clean up the spilled coffee, but Alexander barely noticed. Alexander spent the next 2 weeks thinking about Professor Martinez's advice. He needed to understand Maya's world, but he wasn't sure how to do that without seeming fake or manipulative. Finally, he came up with an idea that surprised even himself. Alexander decided to get a job as a waiter at a restaurant similar to Legrand. Not because he needed the money, but because he wanted to understand what Maya's daily life was really like. He found a restaurant called Bella Vista in a different part of the city. It was upscale like Legrand, with wealthy customers and high expectations for service. Alexander used a fake name and claimed he was a college student who needed work to pay for school. The manager, Mr. Torres, was skeptical at first. Alexander was clearly older than most college students, and something about him seemed too polished for restaurant work. Have you ever waited tables before? Mr. Torres asked. No, but I'm a quick learner, Alexander lied. Mr. Torres shrugged. We're short-staffed, so I'll give you a try. But the job is harder than it looks. Rich customers can be very demanding and sometimes very rude. Alexander almost smiled at the irony. He had been one of those rude customers just 2 weeks ago. On his first day, Alexander realized that he had never appreciated how difficult restaurant work really was. He had to memorize complicated menu items, carry heavy trays without dropping anything, and smile at customers even when they treated him badly. Within 2 hours, his feet were sore, his back ached, and he had spilled soup on his shirt. By the end of the shift, Alexander was exhausted in a way he had never experienced before. But the hardest part wasn't the physical work. It was the way some customers treated him. A woman in expensive jewelry snapped her fingers at him like he was a dog when she wanted more bread. A businessman complained loudly that Alexander was too slow, even though he was moving as fast as he could. A young couple laughed when Alexander accidentally brought them the wrong drinks, making jokes about stupid waiters right in front of him. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander experienced what it felt like to be treated as if he didn't matter. He began to understand why Maya had been so angry about his behavior at Legrand. After a week of working at Bella Vista, Alexander was getting better at the job, but he was also learning things about himself that made him uncomfortable. He realized that before this experience, he had never thought of restaurant servers as real people with lives, dreams and feelings outside of their work. One evening, Alexander was serving a table of 4 wealthy business people. They were discussing a deal worth millions of dollars, and they completely ignored Alexander as he brought their food and refilled their drinks. As Alexander walked away from their table, he heard one of the men say, "The service here is so slow. These waiters are probably too stupid to get real jobs." Alexander felt his face turn red with anger and embarrassment. 2 weeks ago, he might have said exactly the same thing. Now he understood how cruel and wrong such comments were. That night after work, Alexander sat in his car in the restaurant parking lot, thinking about Maya. She had been doing this kind of work for 3 years, dealing with rude customers every day, while knowing that she was capable of so much more. Alexander's respect for Maya grew even deeper. She had maintained her dignity and kindness despite facing the kind of treatment that was making him angry after just 1 week. The next day, Alexander decided it was time to try approaching Maya again. But this time, he would be honest about what he had learned. He went to Le Grand on a Wednesday evening when the restaurant was busy but not overwhelmed. Maya was working her usual section, moving gracefully between tables with the same professional smile she always wore. Alexander sat at a table in Maya's section and waited for her to notice him. When she approached his table, her smile disappeared. "What are you doing here?" Maya asked quietly, trying not to make a scene. "I wanted to see you again," Alexander said. "I have something I need to tell you." Maya looked around nervously. She couldn't afford to ignore a customer, even one she disliked. "I'm working," Maya said. "I can't have personal conversations during my shift." "Then let me order something and we can talk while you serve me," Alexander suggested. Maya sighed and pulled out her order pad. "What do you want?" Alexander ordered a simple pasta dish and water. He wasn't really hungry, but he wanted to give Maya a reason to keep coming back to his table. When Maya brought his water, Alexander said, "I've been working as a waiter for the past week." Maya looked surprised. "What?" "I got a job at a restaurant across town. I wanted to understand what your life is really like." Maya stared at him suspiciously. "Why would you do that?" "Because I realized that I had no idea what it meant to work in a restaurant. I thought it was easy work for people who weren't smart enough to do anything else. I was wrong." Maya didn't respond, but Alexander could see that she was listening. When Maya brought his pasta, Alexander continued, "I learned that restaurant work is much harder than I thought. My feet hurt, my back aches, and some customers treat me like I'm invisible or stupid. After 1 week, I'm exhausted and frustrated." "You've been doing this for 3 years. Maya set down his plate carefully. "Millions of people work in restaurants. It's not special or unusual. But you're not millions of people," Alexander said. "You're a gifted musician who should be performing for audiences, not serving them dinner." Maya's jaw tightened. "We've had this conversation before. I don't want your help." She started to walk away, but Alexander called her back. "Maya, I'm not offering help anymore. I'm offering friendship." Maya turned around.
"What? I want to be your friend."
"No money, no charity, no strings attached. Just friendship." Maya looked confused and suspicious. "Why would someone like you want to be friends with someone like me?" Alexander felt sad that she had to ask that question. "Because you're one of the most impressive people I've ever met. You have talent, integrity, and strength. You sacrificed your dreams to help your family, and you've never complained about it. You work harder than most people I know, and you do it with grace and dignity." Maya stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. "I don't need friends who feel sorry for me," she said finally. "I don't feel sorry for you," Alexander replied honestly. "I admire you. I wish I had half of your character." Other customers were starting to notice that Maya was spending a lot of time at Alexander's table. She realized she needed to get back to work. "I have to serve my other tables," she said. "I understand. But Maya, would you consider having coffee with me sometime? Not so I can offer you money or opportunities. Just so we can talk as equals." Maya hesitated. Something in Alexander's voice sounded different than before. He seemed less arrogant, more humble. "I don't know," Maya said. "I don't trust your motives." Alexander nodded. "I understand that. I haven't given you any reason to trust me. But maybe we could start over and get to know each other as real people." Maya walked away to check on her other customers, but she kept thinking about Alexander's words. He did seem different somehow, less cold, more genuine. When she brought Alexander his check at the end of the meal, she made a decision. "There's a coffee shop called Maria's 2 blocks from here," Maya said quietly. "I go there sometimes after work to unwind. If you want to have a normal conversation, you could meet me there Friday night at 10 o'clock. Alexander felt a spark of hope. "I'll be there. But," Maya added firmly, "if you try to offer me money or talk about my music career, I'll leave immediately. This is just coffee between 2 people, nothing more." "Agreed," Alexander said. That Friday night, Alexander arrived at Maria's coffee shop 15 minutes early. It was a small, cozy place with mismatched furniture and local artwork on the walls. Alexander had never been to a place like this before, but he found it comfortable and welcoming. Maya arrived exactly at 10 o'clock, wearing jeans and a simple sweater. Without her work uniform, she looked younger and more relaxed. They ordered coffee and found a quiet table in the corner. For the first few minutes, they sat in awkward silence, neither sure how to begin a normal conversation. Finally, Maya spoke up. "So you really worked as a waiter for a week?" Alexander nodded. "It was humbling. I dropped food, spilled drinks, and got yelled at by customers. I have a new appreciation for how difficult the job is." "Why did you really do it?" Maya asked. "Was it just to impress me?" Alexander thought about the question carefully. "At first, maybe. But after a few days, it became about more than that. I realized I had never understood what most people's lives are really like. I've been wealthy my whole life. I never had to worry about money or work jobs I didn't like." Maya sipped her coffee. "And now you do understand?" "I understand better than I did before," Alexander said. "But I know 1 week doesn't make me an expert on working-class life. I still have a lot to learn." They talked for 2 hours that night. Alexander told Maya about growing up wealthy but lonely, with parents who were too busy with their own lives to pay much attention to him. Maya talked about her childhood, when her family wasn't rich but was happy and close. For the first time, they were talking to each other as equals, not as a rich man and a poor waitress. "I have to ask you something," Maya said as they were getting ready to leave. "Why is my situation so important to you? There are millions of people who have given up their dreams for practical reasons." Over the next month, Alexander and Maya met for coffee every Friday night at Maria's. Slowly, they began to trust each other and develop a real friendship. Alexander learned that Maya loved reading mystery novels, had a silly sense of humor, and missed her college friends. Maya discovered that Alexander was lonelier than she had imagined, despite his wealth and success. "Don't you have friends?" Maya asked one Friday evening. Alexander stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "I have business associates and people who want favors from me. But real friends, people who like me for who I am rather than what I can do for them, so not really." Maya felt sorry for him, which surprised her. She had never thought she would feel sympathy for someone so wealthy. "That sounds lonely," she said. "It is," Alexander admitted. "Money makes some things easier, but it makes other things much harder. Like knowing whether people genuinely care about you." During these conversations, Alexander never mentioned Maya's music or her family's financial situation. He had promised to treat her as just a friend, and he kept that promise. But privately, Alexander was still working on his plan to help the Chen family. He just had to be very careful about how he did it. Alexander had learned from his research that Maya's father was still receiving follow-up treatment at the hospital. The family was making monthly payments on their medical debt, but the payments were large enough to keep them struggling financially. Using his business connections, Alexander arranged to have Maya's father assigned to a new doctor, one of the best cancer specialists in the city. He also arranged for this doctor to participate in a research study that would cover all of Maya's father's remaining medical costs. Of course, there was no real research study. Alexander was simply paying all the bills through a fake medical foundation he had created. But the Chen family would never know that. Alexander also set up a scholarship fund at the state college where Professor Martinez taught. He called it the Emergency Family Support Scholarship, and made sure it was available to students who had to leave school due to family medical crises. The scholarship was designed specifically for someone exactly like Maya, though Alexander made sure her name was never mentioned in the paperwork. Finally, Alexander contacted Professor Hayes at Juilliard and arranged to pay for Maya to audit several classes, if she ever decided to return to music. Professor Hayes agreed to keep Alexander's involvement secret. Alexander told himself that he was just creating opportunities for Maya. Whether she used them or not would be her choice. Meanwhile, Maya was starting to enjoy her friendship with Alexander more than she wanted to admit. He was different from anyone she had ever known, not just because of his wealth, but because of his complicated personality. One Friday night, as they were leaving Maria's coffee shop, Maya made a decision that surprised herself. "Would you like to come meet my parents?" she asked. Alexander looked shocked. "Are you sure? I mean, after everything that's happened?" "They know we've been having coffee together," Maya said. "My mother is curious about you. She wants to see if you're as arrogant as she expected." Alexander laughed nervously. "And what do you think she'll decide?" I think she'll be surprised, Maya said with a small smile. You're not what people expect when they hear billionaire businessman. The next Sunday afternoon, Alexander found himself standing outside the Chen family's apartment building again. But this time he felt completely different than during his first visit. This time he was coming as Maya's friend, not as someone trying to solve their problems with money. Maya had warned her parents that Alexander was nothing like the cruel man from the restaurant incident. She told them he had become humble and kind, though she wasn't sure they believed her. When Maya opened the apartment door, Alexander was holding a small bouquet of flowers for her mother and a book about business history for her father. "These are beautiful," Mrs. Chen said, accepting the flowers with surprise. She had expected Alexander to arrive with expensive gifts that would make the family uncomfortable. Mr. Chen shook Alexander's hand and thanked him for the book. "Maya tells us you've been working as a waiter," he said with curiosity. Alexander nodded. "It taught me a lot about myself and about how hard Maya works every day." They sat in the Chen family's small living room, drinking tea and talking about simple things: the weather, current events, Maya's favorite books. Alexander was careful not to mention money, business deals, or anything that might make the family feel uncomfortable. After an hour, Mrs. Chen pulled Maya aside in the kitchen. "He's not what I expected," she whispered to her daughter. "What do you mean?" Maya asked. "He seems genuinely kind, and he looks at you like you're important to him." Maya felt her cheeks getting warm. "We're just friends, Mom." Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly but didn't say anything more. When Alexander was getting ready to leave, Mr. Chen walked him to the door. "Thank you for being a good friend to Maya," Mr. Chen said quietly. "She has sacrificed so much for our family. She deserves to have someone who appreciates her." Alexander felt emotional hearing those words. "Your daughter is an amazing person, Mr. Chen. You and your wife raised someone special." As Alexander drove home that evening, he realized that his feelings for Maya had grown beyond friendship, though he wasn't sure she felt the same way. 2 weeks later, Maya received surprising news at work. Mr. Rodriguez, the restaurant manager, called her into his office with a big smile on his face. "Maya, I have incredible news," he said. "Your father's doctor called. Apparently, your father has been selected for some kind of research study that will cover all his remaining medical costs." Maya stared at Mr. Rodriguez in shock. What kind of research study?" "I don't know the details, but the doctor's office said all your family's medical debts will be paid off completely. It's some kind of program for cancer survivors." Maya felt dizzy with disbelief. This was too good to be true. Her family had been making payments on those medical bills for 3 years. The debt was enormous. That evening, Maya rushed home to talk to her parents. They had received the same phone call from the doctor's office. The doctor said it's a new program that helps families who have suffered from medical emergencies, Mr. Chen explained. "We've been chosen because of my case history and our financial situation." Mrs. Chen was crying happy tears. "Maya, this means you won't have to work so many hours to help us pay the bills. You could have a normal life again." Maya should have been overjoyed, but something felt wrong. This kind of miracle didn't just happen to ordinary families like hers. The next Friday night, Maya met Alexander for their usual coffee, but she was quiet and thoughtful. "Is everything all right?" Alexander asked. Maya looked at him carefully. "My father received some very good news this week. His remaining medical bills are being covered by a research study." Alexander tried to look surprised. "That's wonderful news, is it?" Maya asked, still studying his face. "Of course it is. Your family has been struggling with those debts for years." Maya leaned forward across the table. "Alexander, I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you have anything to do with this research study?" Alexander felt his heart racing. He had hoped Maya would never figure out his involvement. "Why would you think that?" he asked, trying to sound innocent. "Because I've never heard of research studies that pay off people's old medical bills. Because this happened right after we became friends. And because you're the kind of person who has the money and connections to arrange something like this." Alexander sat quietly for a long moment. He realized that lying to Maya would destroy their friendship completely. "Yes," he said finally. "I arranged it." Maya's face turned red with anger. "How could you do that after I specifically told you I didn't want your charity?" "It's not charity," Alexander said quickly. "It's an investment in your family's future. And besides, you never knew I was involved, so it didn't hurt your pride." Maya stood up so quickly that her chair fell backward. "It didn't hurt my pride. Alexander, you went behind my back and made decisions about my family's life without asking us. Other people in the coffee shop were starting to stare, but Maya didn't care. You lied to me for weeks while pretending to be my friend, Maya continued, her voice getting louder. You made me think we had a genuine friendship while you were secretly manipulating my life. Alexander stood up too. Maya, please sit down. Let me explain. Explain what? How you think you can control people's lives with your money. How you think poor people are too stupid to make their own decisions. That's not what I think at all, Alexander said desperately. I wanted to help you because I care about you. Maya laughed bitterly. You care about me? If you cared about me, you would have respected my wishes and left my family alone. She picked up her purse and started to leave. But Alexander grabbed her arm gently. Maya, your father needed that medical care. Your family needed to be free from that debt. I saw an opportunity to help, and I took it. Maya pulled her arm away. That wasn't your choice to make. So you would rather have your family keep struggling just to preserve your pride? As soon as the words left his mouth, Alexander knew he had said the wrong thing. Maya's eyes filled with tears of rage. My pride? You think this is about pride? This is about honesty, Alexander. This is about treating people like human beings instead of charity cases. 3 months passed after Maya's angry confrontation with Alexander at the coffee shop. During that time, Maya tried to find a way to reject the medical assistance that Alexander had secretly arranged. But it proved impossible. The fake research study was so well designed that even when Maya explained her suspicions to the hospital administrators, they insisted the program was legitimate. The bills had already been paid, and there was no way to reverse the payments without causing serious problems for the hospital's accounting system. Maya's father was also receiving excellent care from his new doctor, and his health was better than it had been in years. Maya couldn't bring herself to disrupt his medical treatment, even though she was angry about how it had been arranged. Reluctantly, Maya accepted that her family would benefit from Alexander's help, but she refused to have any contact with him. When he tried to call her, she wouldn't answer. When he came to the restaurant, she asked other servers to handle his table. Maya threw herself into her work, picking up extra shifts and saving every penny she could. She was determined to prove that she didn't need Alexander's charity to improve her life. But late at night, when Maya was alone in her small bedroom, she sometimes thought about their conversations at Maria's coffee shop. Despite everything that had happened, she missed their friendship. Alexander was also struggling during those 3 months. He had quit his fake job at Bella Vista restaurant and returned to running his technology company, but work no longer felt important to him. He found himself thinking about Maya constantly. He regretted the way he had handled everything, and he desperately wanted to apologize properly, but Maya had made it clear that she never wanted to see him again. Alexander also began making changes in his business practices. He started paying his employees better wages and treating them with more respect. He set up a genuine scholarship fund at several colleges to help students from low-income families. These changes felt good, but they didn't fill the emptiness that Alexander felt without Maya's friendship. One day in early spring, Professor Martinez called Maya at the restaurant. Maya, I have some exciting news, he said. The State College has received a generous donation to restart our annual student concert series. We want you to be our featured performer for the first concert back. Maya was surprised. Professor Martinez, I haven't performed publicly in 3 years. I'm not ready for something like that. Nonsense, Professor Martinez said. I heard about your performance at the restaurant from Professor Hayes. He said you were magnificent. This would be a perfect opportunity for you to return to music gradually. Maya felt tempted but also scared. I don't know if I remember how to perform for an audience. The concert is in 6 weeks, Professor Martinez said. That's enough time to prepare if you start practicing now. Maya, this could be the beginning of your return to the music world. After much thought, Maya decided to accept. She arranged to cut back her restaurant hours and began practicing on the old piano in her parents' apartment building's community room. Maya didn't know that Alexander had anonymously donated the money for the concert series, hoping it would give Maya a chance to return to music on her own terms. As Maya practiced for the concert, she felt her love of music returning stronger than ever. Her fingers remembered the complex pieces she had learned years ago, and she found herself composing new music inspired by her experiences over the past 3 years. One piece she wrote was about sacrifice and family love. Another was about the loneliness of working in a job that didn't fulfill her dreams. A third piece was about unexpected friendship and the pain of betrayal. Maya decided to perform this last piece at the concert, even though it reminded her of Alexander. Meanwhile, Alexander had heard about the concert through Professor Martinez, though the professor didn't reveal Alexander's role in funding it. Alexander desperately wanted to attend, but he was afraid that seeing him in the audience would upset Maya and ruin her performance. The night of the concert, Alexander sat in his penthouse apartment, wishing he could be there to support Maya. He had no idea that she was thinking about him too as she prepared backstage. The concert hall at the State College was packed with people. Maya's parents were in the front row, beaming with pride. Professor Martinez introduced Maya with glowing words about her talent and her comeback. When Maya walked onto the stage and sat at the beautiful grand piano, she felt nervous but also excited. This was where she belonged, sharing her music with people who appreciated it. Maya played 3 classical pieces flawlessly, earning enthusiastic applause from the audience. Then she announced that she would conclude with an original composition. "This piece is called Unexpected Lessons," Maya said into the microphone. "It's about how sometimes the people who challenge us the most also teach us the most about ourselves." As Maya played her original composition, the audience was completely silent, captured by the emotional depth of her music. The piece began with harsh, angry notes that gradually transformed into something more complex. Sadness mixed with understanding. Disappointment combined with hope. In the final section, the music became beautiful and peaceful, suggesting forgiveness and new beginnings. When Maya finished playing, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. There were tears in many people's eyes, including Maya's parents, Professor Hayes, who had come from New York specifically to hear Maya perform, approached her backstage after the concert. "Maya, that was extraordinary," he said. "I want to discuss your future with you. Juilliard has a special program for returning students, and I think you would be perfect for it." Maya felt overwhelmed with emotion. This was the opportunity she had dreamed about for years. "But I can't afford Juilliard," Maya said. "And I can't abandon my family again," Professor Hayes smiled. "There are scholarship opportunities available that would cover all your expenses. And the program allows you to complete your degree in an accelerated format, so you would only be away from home for 18 months. Maya could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Maya, you have a gift that the world needs to hear. I want to help you develop that gift to its full potential." That night, Maya's parents threw a small celebration party in their apartment. Friends and neighbors came to congratulate Maya on her successful comeback performance. As the evening was winding down, there was a knock at the apartment door. Maya opened it and found Alexander standing in the hallway holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "I heard about your performance tonight. Everyone is saying it was incredible." Maya stared at him, not sure what to feel. She was still angry about his deception, but she was also happy to see him. "How did you know about the concert?" Maya asked. Alexander hesitated. "Professor Martinez mentioned it." Maya studied his face. "Did you have anything to do with funding the concert series?" Alexander looked uncomfortable but didn't deny it. Maya sighed. "Of course you did. You just can't help yourself, can you? Maya, I know you're angry with me and you have every right to be, but I want you to know that I've learned from my mistakes." Maya's parents had noticed who was at the door and came to see what was happening. "Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Chen said politely. "Would you like to come in?" Maya looked like she wanted to say no, but her parents had raised her to be polite to guests. Alexander entered the small apartment, which was still decorated with flowers and congratulations cards from the concert. "I won't stay long," Alexander said. "I just wanted to tell Maya how proud I am of her for returning to music." Mr. Chen offered Alexander tea, which he accepted gratefully. The 4 of them sat in the living room, with an awkward silence filling the space. Finally, Alexander spoke up. "Maya, I owe you a sincere apology. You were right to be angry with me. I tried to control your life with money instead of respecting your choices." Maya listened but didn't respond. "I've spent the past 3 months thinking about what you said," Alexander continued. "You taught me that friendship means treating people as equals, not as problems to be solved." Maya's expression softened slightly. Alexander, I appreciate the apology. But how do I know you've really changed? How do I know you won't try to manipulate my life again the next time you think you know what's best for me? Alexander nodded. You're right to be suspicious. I can't prove that I've changed just with words. I can only prove it through my actions over time. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the coffee table. This contains information about the scholarship opportunities at Juilliard that Professor Hayes mentioned. I want you to know that I had nothing to do with creating these opportunities. They existed before I met you, and they would be available whether I was involved or not. Maya looked at the envelope but didn't pick it up. I'm telling you about them because Professor Martinez asked me to, Alexander continued. He thought you might trust the information more if it came from someone you know rather than directly from the school. Mrs. Chen picked up the envelope and looked inside. Her eyes widened as she read the scholarship details. Maya, her mother said excitedly, this says you could get a full scholarship that covers tuition, housing, and living expenses. You wouldn't have to pay anything. Maya took the papers from her mother and read them carefully.